Tonight on NewsWatch, overstepping its bounds, why the FCC is backing away from a proposed plan on newsroom monitoring. Plus, we'll take a drive along the I-29 corridor to see how some are working to reach the least evangelized region of the country. And why some surgeons are calling on God before they make the first cut. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. Good evening. I'm Mark Martin. The Federal Communications Commission has abandoned a plan to place government monitors in newsrooms, at least for now. The plan would have had the FCC asking questions about why journalists decide to cover certain stories. But as Paul Strand found out, First Amendment defenders are concerned even though the plan is on hold, this threat to freedom of the press may not be completely dead.
FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai blew the whistle on his own agency, revealing in the Wall Street Journal the FCC would be sending researchers into newsrooms and grilling journalists about their news choices.
How do you decide to cover certain stories? What's your news philosophy? Does your station have a perceived bias? And those are questions I don't think belong in any newsroom, and certainly not when posed by the government.
Supposedly cooperating with these monitors would be voluntary. But when a big agency like the FCC has the power to revoke your broadcast license, that's a lot of pressure to play along and do what your government wants.
Attorney Matthew Clark at the American Center for Law and Justice saw the monitoring scheme as a clear danger to the First Amendment.
It protects the American people from having a federal government that would promote its own agenda through the press, forcing the press to cover the stories that it wants it to cover, that it believes that the American people need to know about.
But I certainly found it to be threatening to our First Amendment values.
One thing these monitors would be finding out is if news outlets were covering 8 specific areas government has deemed critical, which Pai thinks would be mighty intimidating.
That was part of the concern, too. The news coverage ultimately could be slanted towards those 8 categories for fear of offending some sort of government monitor.
Pai and Clark both cheered when the FCC backed down in the face of a huge public outcry, like more than 80,000 people signing an ACLJ petition protesting the scheme.
When the American people stand up with one voice and say no FCC monitors in the newsrooms of the American people, that really made a huge difference.
Pai rejoiced at this particular promise.
That neither this study nor any future study would involve the government or researchers hired by the government posing questions to media owners, to news directors, or to news reporters about any of these kinds of questions.
But these First Amendment defenders worry this fight may not be permanently over.
It is important to stay vigilant.
I make the analogy to a baseball game. When a baseball game is suspended, that doesn't mean it's canceled. It just means that a play is going to resume at some later time.
Some see it as no coincidence this monitoring plan was coming from the same administration whose IRS was holding up tax-exempt status for Tea Party and conservative groups and grilling them about their motives.
It is just an overarching philosophy of trying to silence the opposition and to control both the media and what is being able to be broadcast or being able to be talked about amongst the American public.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
State attorneys general who think their state's gay marriage bans are unconstitutional should not have to defend them. That's according to U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. Speaking to the National Association of Attorneys General, Holder said deciding not to defend a state's law should only be done under exceptional circumstances, noting cases against gay marriage bans qualify as such. Democratic attorneys general in Virginia, Pennsylvania, California, Illinois, Oregon, and Nevada have all declined to defend same-sex marriage bans against lawsuits filed by gay couples. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer is under intense pressure over a proposed law involving religious and gay rights. Critics say the measure discriminates against gays by allowing some businesses to deny them service. Supporters say the bill simply protects religious freedom when necessary. For instance, if a bakery run by Christians doesn't want to provide a cake for a gay wedding. Voters in Arizona passed a state constitutional amendment banning gay marriage in 2008, and you can find out more about this case by going to cbnnews.com. Most people think religious liberty in America is decreasing. That's according to a new survey from Lifeway Research. The poll finds 54% of Americans say religious liberty is on the decline, and 50% say Christians in the country are increasingly being subjected to intolerance. Even in the face of growing intolerance, the church is working to reach Americans with the gospel. The upper Midwest is one of the least evangelized areas of the country, so Christian leaders are trying a new way to spread the good news. Here again is Paul Strand.
The I-29 corridor runs north and south through several states in the upper Midwest, all the way from Kansas City, Missouri, to the Canadian border. The route also runs through what Southern Baptist leaders see as a ripe mission field. Baptist leader Leo Endell says research led to a vision for evangelism.
We begin to realize that it wasn't just that Southern Baptists weren't there. Evangelicals at large were underrepresented. There are evangelical churches in many of these communities, but they're in much smaller numbers than they are in other places in the United States.
As a result, the North American Mission Board, along with other partners, will launch the Heartland Interstate strategy this year. Its goal, strengthen existing churches and plant new ones across the region over the next 4 years.
I think the people in the upper Midwest are like people anywhere. They're trying to make sense out of life. They're struggling through with the regular struggles that we all have, making ends meet, trying to find our way. Where's our significance?
The Heartland Interstate strategy is to plant churches in 7 strategic cities along the I-29 corridor. Once the churches are established, they plan to spread the gospel east and west into more remote regions.
We wondered if we could take the strength of Missouri particularly and come straight up I-29 into the major cities, St. Joseph, Omaha, Sioux City, Sioux Falls, Fargo, Grand Forks, and then even to Winnipeg.
Church planter Jonathan Land recently relocated to Sioux Falls, South Dakota with his wife and 2 girls. In addition to a strategic target, Sioux Falls is also the biggest city in the Dakotas.
We made an intentional effort to have volunteer teams help us canvass areas, knocked on doors, introduced ourselves as a church. This is who we are. We love this city. We're excited to be here. Want to bless you.
Land told CBN News his vision for reaching the upper Midwest comes straight from the Bible.
Our passion came from the book of Acts, and so we wanted to be a part of a biblical church. We wanted to see the gospel go out in an area that maybe had either been impervious to it or completely unaffected by it.
Mark Elliott, who helps in the overall planting strategy, says the key for a strong church foundation always begins with prayer.
I think the critical #1 piece is just pray for the spiritual needs in the area, pray that Lord would raise up leaders for the harvest and from the harvest.
While the Heartland Interstate strategy is still in the beginning stages, church leaders hope a major push planned for the fall could ultimately help fulfill the Great Commission.
We see our role here in Sioux Falls as just one little piece of this amazing thing that God has been doing among the nations. His glory is going to be known among everyone.
Paul Strand, CBN News.
Turning overseas now, reports tonight that Israel carried out an airstrike along the Syrian-Lebanon border late Monday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would not confirm the strike on an alleged weapons shipment from Syria into Lebanon. Lebanon's state news agency says the strike took place in the Bekaa Valley, an area with strong Hezbollah presence. Netanyahu has vowed to prevent such arms transfers, saying Israel does, quote, all that is needed to protect the security of its citizens. The fight over land has long been the cause of conflict between Israel and Palestine. Now a new documentary looks to answer the question, whose land is it? Chris Mitchell explains from Jerusalem.
Israel Indivisible, the case for the ancient homeland, highlights Israel's latest challenge.
The world media has joined the Islamic campaign to extinguish Jewish history as part of their effort to delegitimize and destroy the Jewish state.
The film lays out a compelling and comprehensive case for Israel's right to the land.
The evidence for Israel is overwhelming. From archaeological science, to historical records, to biblical scriptures, to political resolutions and laws, there should be no dispute as to the rights of the Jewish people to all the land the Roman Empire called Palestine.
The producers chose to premiere the film in a symbolic site here in Ariel, the center of Israel's biblical heartland. At the Holy Land premiere, the film's producers presented the film's motive.
The goal is to educate Christians, to bring this message, because the message is being distorted and there's lies being propagated about Israel and this whole Middle East conflict. I feel like what we're doing at PJTN is just coming alongside, God's biblical narrative and telling a story that nobody seems to want to tell. And then, you know, of course, using the film, using the program to mobilize Christians to action, to stand with our Jewish brethren.
Many Jews believe disinformation is one of the main weapons against the Jewish state.
The first step in, God forbid, the physical destruction of the state of Israel is the intellectual destruction, undermining the whole reason for being of the Jewish state, or the legitimacy.
The film unmasks some common misconceptions in this disinformation campaign, like the term West Bank.
Well, why is it called the West Bank? It's called the West Bank because when Jordan, basically in 1948, when they took it over, they called it the West Bank of their country, the West Bank of the Jordan River. They named it the West Bank. You know, for centuries and for, you know, forever, it's been called Judea and Samaria.
Many see the film as a tool to give Israel supporters the facts they need in this battle.
And if they don't have the facts at hand, they become apologetic. The minute they become apologetic, they lose the argument. They need to be knowledgeable. Once they're knowledgeable, they'll be able to stand up for what's right.
Spiro sees information as the first line of defense, not only for Israel, but the West.
It's not only threatening Israel, it's threatening the whole foundation of Western civilization even. Movies like this that present information and facts are the most basic and powerful tool we have for not just the case for Israel, but for the case for truth.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Ariel, Israel.
Coming up, CBN News is on the ground in Ukraine, bringing you the latest on the revolution and what lies ahead. Ukraine doesn't have a new government yet. The country's parliament is delaying the formation of one until Thursday. That as political tensions between pro-Russian Ukrainians and those more Western-minded continue. Meanwhile, the country's interim leader says strong relations with the West will lead to democratic development, and if they revisit closer ties to Europe, the West may offer financial aid to strengthen Ukraine's failing economy. The country needs $35 billion to finance the government through the year. Meanwhile, former President Viktor Yanukovych still on the run, facing an arrest warrant as the country prepares for elections to replace him. Our senior international correspondent George Thomas is in Kiev, where many former protesters say the future is still unclear.
I first met 57-year-old Yevgeny Sukhanov 3 weeks ago on what was then the front line of the battle for Ukraine.
I want the president and his entire corrupt and oppressive government gone.
He and a band of brothers from across the country took up positions on this barricade in the heart of the capital city, staring down hundreds of government forces.
I'm here to fight against the evils of my government.
That was then. You're here. You're alive. 3 weeks later, he's still here.
This is where we were fighting. There was a huge fire.
Not wanting to appear prideful, Sukhanov says he's all right.
This area was full of burning tires, and I was standing here and watching that side.
Since then, the political world around him has changed dramatically.
Of course, I knew this day would come. I was sure that good would overcome evil, because good always wins.
Days after he and thousands of Ukrainians helped remove President Viktor Yanukovych from power.
Come take a look. Here they are, in the midst of ordinary folks who consider them as national heroes.
Sukhanov and fellow countrymen who stood tall on Hrusevskaya Street receive applause. That's Sukhanov on the far left.
I don't see myself as a hero. I would have rather died than see all those who were killed. I saw a boy who was killed right here.
Thousands of people waited patiently in line this week, standing where Ukrainian forces once stood, then eventually crossing so-called no man's land into finally anti-government territory.
And today it is a memorial, a monument of sorts to what happened here, the tragedies that took place, and ordinary citizens. They are lining them by the hundreds. You saw them coming in. They've been coming in all day to pay their respects and really in some ways to walk around and to try to imagine what it was like.
One of Sukhanov's brothers rises to sing about love of country. There's not a dry eye in the audience. Here and on Kiev's famed Independence Square, people say it is hard to predict which direction the country will go. There's talk of splitting up Ukraine in two, as supporters and opponents of Viktor Yanukovych clash with growing frequency.
It is not time for me to go home yet. There are many forces around us trying to dismantle what we fought for. I still have to stay at my post.
George Thomas, CBN News, Kiev, Ukraine.
And for more from George, make sure you check out his Facebook page. Just search George Thomas, CBN News, and there you'll see pictures of George's behind-the-scene tour of Viktor Yanukovych's mansion. Up next, meet some surgeons who pray before you go under the knife. If you were facing an operation, you'd normally depend on your doctor for his surgical skills, and you'd look to a chaplain or your pastor for prayer. Now, a growing number of surgeons are also praying with their patients before they operate. Paul Strand has tonight's Focus Report.
It would be against his oath if Dallas heart surgeon Mark Poole didn't study every patient's case before operating. But he also feels it's against his calling if he doesn't at least offer to pray with them.
God is the great physician. He's the one that controls life and death.
Poole looks at the scalpel as his instrument during surgery.
In the same way, I see myself as an instrument in the hand of God. So I'm the one doing the operation, but He's the one guiding me.
We know about your love because you sent your Son. We know about your power because you raised Him from the dead.
And Poole wants to pray with his patients so they, too, can focus on that great physician. When folks are facing medical emergencies, some people would say that's exactly the wrong time to pressure them about spiritual matters. But most patients say it actually takes much of the pressure off to bring God and prayer into their situations, and they appreciate it. Take the case of Tom Pryor.
His risk of dying was probably 90% if he had no surgery. Even if you do an emergency surgery, the risk of dying is about 30%.
When Poole brought up praying,
I was slightly taken back for just a second, and then realizing my condition and the things that were going on, I thought it was probably a pretty good idea.
Pryor said Poole's prayers calmed and relaxed him. But was there a much bigger answer?
Yes, I am here.
Another praying surgeon, Rohan Jayaraja, says he understands a doctor offering to pray could make some patients uncomfortable and worried they can't refuse this powerful person.
To some degree, it can be like a teacher and a student, and you have to make sure that you're not overstepping your boundaries there or being inappropriate in that relationship.
The critics would say, well, there's a power differential. You're this powerful doctor, this poor patient's there helpless, and they feel like if they say no, you might not do your best during the surgery or something like that.
I think it's important to be sensitive to the fact that there are patients, number one, who may not be Christian, and number two, who may not believe in God at all.
Still, Jayaraja says he's witnessed God do so much at his hospital, he can't help but believe and pray.
I see the hand of God every day. I always say that with the work that I do, it's almost like every day is going to church.
Poole, too, has seen miracles. For instance, with a patient whose heart just stopped one day.
And I opened his chest up, and I was squeezing his heart. Nothing was happening, and I prayed, Lord, save this man. We kept working, and within a few minutes, his heart started to beat. And there was nothing I had done differently to it. It just started up. And so his life was saved. He went home. He's doing great.
But not everyone wants contact with this spiritual world.
I have had one patient that turned me down. I was there, we're about to start the surgery. I said, would you mind if I say a prayer with you? He said, I prefer not.
Still, both Poole and Jayaraja's spiritual work gets almost 100% support from their patients.
Oftentimes they'll say, that prayer meant the world to us.
That's how Russell Truitt felt after he had a heart attack, but waited about 3 weeks before going to the hospital.
Which is not the doctor's advice.
Poole did a double bypass on Truitt, accompanied by lots of prayers.
It was a huge relief. Being a Christian, whenever he asked that, it just took the world of pressure off my chest.
CBN News talked with Jimmy Mayfield just before Poole replaced a valve in the 78-year-old's heart.
It makes me feel better to know that the guy that's going to make the decisions when he gets in there has the Lord with him and has that peace.
We pray that his operation would go smoothly.
Jayaraja says some people may think they wouldn't want these kind of prayers, but they probably haven't faced a killer disease yet.
At the moment that you find out that you've got some horrible disease, cancer, whatever, I don't care what you believe in. If you actively don't believe in God, you believe in God at that moment.
Truitt encourages other doctors to follow Poole's and Jayaraja's example.
I think they would be surprised how many of their patients would appreciate it if they did do it.
1 Thessalonians says, pray without ceasing. And that definitely means pray before you go and operate.
These doctors are humble enough to admit they're not the great physician, but wise enough to say, since they know him, it's a pretty smart decision to bring him into their surgeries. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Texas Health Presbyterian in Dallas, Texas.
A great story. Well, up next, paintings to ease pain. How one Texas man is using art to bless sick children. A Texas man is bringing smiles to children in a West Houston hospital, one painting at a time. Larry Crawford calls himself a creative color engineer. His paintings and murals cover the walls of Texas Children's Hospital West Campus, trying to help ease the anxiety of young patients.
Beautiful hospital, great colors, great design, wide open spaces. Yet our procedure and treatment rooms were a little intimidating for kids.
You know they're struggling. You know that they're going to face some tough procedures, and some are going through sicknesses and stuff. And it melts my heart.
Wow, what a blessing. The murals are placed strategically to help distract children from invasive procedures. Many of them incorporate items that can be counted or that are familiar to kids. Tell you what, he is a gifted, as he said, a color engineer, creative color engineer. That's all for this edition of NewsWatch. Remember, you can email us your comments and questions at newswatch@cbn.com. Hope you'll join us next time.